Hey folks, hope everyone had a lovely Christmas and is looking forward to a happy Hogmanay and a beautiful 2025. Anyway, here we go with the latest episode of Outlander, which as it turns out was written this week by the author of our books herself, Diana Gabaldon. Episode 714, You Didn't Get Used to It, starts out with a flashback to John and his brother, arguing about the war and their son signing up, and has John very pointedly swearing never to accept US independence. Ironic as in the next scene we see John literally swearing his allegiance to US independence. Whoops.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Meanwhile,
And back in Philadelphia, Jamie and Claire's stolen house is getting co-opted for a big meal and a strategic discussion that night by George Washington.
Washington, 6'8", weighs a fucking ton.
And while she's out buying some food, she also bumps into who else but bloody Lafayette himself, who decides that she's smashing and promises to give her some French cheese. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Because he's French, right? And that night when the meeting's on, he slips her his eel. He slips her some jelly deals, and, she has to eat them and pretend that they're tasty. Yuck, yuck, yuck. Because he's French, right? And then Washington gives Claire a flag, and then they all leave, except for this one dude, because apparently, he wanted to discuss work at the work dinner. Typical, there's always one. And shortly after that, they're back off to war again, and Jamie's doing his fatherly command a bit, and Claire's clearing for the sick, and who pops up in the queue? Only Lord John, who's a bit like,
You ain't seen me. Right.
but Claire's like, Jamie, here, now. And John surrenders to him, which is probably the smart move. Claire has a look at his bad eye, and turns out it's bad, like it's jammed bad, and she has to literally take her manky hands and put it back to working again. And, John's just starting to enjoy 20/20 vision again when Lafayette's aide-de-camp pops up. And it turns out that they know each other from way back, because he's not actually French, he's some sort of spy for the British, or possibly the French, I'm not very sure. But anyway, he knows about a plot by the rebel spy captain to get William kidnapped. Oh no. And of course, danger to Bill means John and Jamie are suddenly both back on the same page. So, since Jamie's theoretically busy with troops, John and Ian decide to go off to stop this dastardly plot while Claire and Jamie look vaguely worried. And Ian, he's been scouting a bit and bonking his new wife, not an awful lot to report.
meanwhile,
Back in the future, Bree got home and missed the locksmith because, sure, but she sees a light on upstairs, so she legs it away and then comes back with a shotgun, planning to go all kinds of Skyfall in the place. But just as she notices how many bad guys there are, Ernie drives up in his van, and the ninjas all pile out, and Bree shoots some warning shots, and they escape. And it turns out Ernie and Fiona got home and Cameron was already there waiting for them, because he must be bloody psychic, this guy. And so they doubled back to Bree's house, and Bree's like, well, I guess it's time for me to go and find Roger then, never mind getting any cops involved or anything. And lastly, back in the past, William's still a bit all over the place, arriving at the camp dishevelled and manky and getting told off by his boss, and just as he's cleaning himself up, Jane arrives and shows him her fanny. Her sister's she shows him her sister, Fanny Pocock. No, really. And they've arrived unasked and unannounced, but they give him back his gorget, and she starts Latining at him a bit to show him how smart he is, and then she kind of undoes all that good work by pointing out that she doesn't understand basic currency or economic principles, somehow, unless it's related to whoring.
My cunt is worth 6 shillings.
Anyway, it turns out that they're on the lam from Captain Buttsex and having fled the whorehouse, and she's like, okay, fine, stay here, but you'll have to do my laundry and try and be normal and maybe not whore around so much, or the deal's off. But that night, she comes to his tent anyway for a quickie, and he's like, no, and she's like, you coward. But he does a smooch on her anyway, which is sort of a bit mutually non-consensual, and which I imagine is supposed to be a romantic way. But anyway, he's still like, no, that's all you're getting, be gone, thought. And the next morning, Fanny and Jane are like, actually, we are off, we hate doing laundry. See ya. But also, we didn't tell you that we straight up murdered Captain Buttsex because he bought wee Fanny's virginity for top dollar. P.S. It was premeditated, that's why we didn't run away beforehand.
I wanted to kill him.
And of course, Billy Blue Balls is like, yeah, fine, just keep hanging out here, my dirty pants need washed tomorrow or something. And before Jane can try it on with him again, he's given a mission by Captain Spy, and he's supposed to go and meet some Hessians and give them a letter. But just as the episode ends, it's clear that any minute now, and it's going to be kidnap time. So what did I think? Well, as you probably guessed from the recap, there was quite a lot that happened this week. A hell of a lot of toing and froing, small event, lots of soap opera character stuff, and a lot of what I would call character positioning. Now, I will say a bit more on this later, but it kind of feels like this is a setup episode, because everything's moving the characters into position for what will, as is normally the case with a prestige TV drama, be the big action from pathos, penultimate episode and finale. The side effect of that is, while it wasn't boring, at least most of it wasn't boring. It does also mean that every single plotline more or less feels like it's treading water a little bit. And I will say here that, respect to Diana Gabaldon as a writer. I don't personally enjoy reading her books, but I think she's got a lot of good ideas and she knows how to spin out a story, clearly. And Outlander's always been a fascinating show and story to watch, even when I complain about it. And this episode did have good stuff in it. As I said, lots of character stuff. It's got all the normal Outlander core things: smooching, bonking, training, doctoring, being a grumpy bastard, spy shenanigans, and a slightly rushed and unsatisfying action scene. Now, some of it was also slightly unpredictable, like the Beecham guy, who I thought was totally going to be set up for some long-lost ancestor joke or something, but actually was a bait and switch for him being a secret spy, and the long-lost ex-lover and ex-stepbrother of Lord John, which is a bit kinky. Even the stuff like Ian and Rachel's scenes, which, a storyline that, honestly, I find slightly less interesting than the build-up of mould around my bathroom window, but the scenes themselves were still decent, and I think this season they've actually managed to coax some really good acting out of John Bell for a change. And I think everybody actually did a pretty good job acting this week. There wasn't really a bum note among them, not even from wee Fanny. I mean, joking aside, the wee actor was really good, but I've got to ask, why the hell would anybody name a character Fanny Pocock? I mean, it's just stupid. But it was also a really good episode from a filming point of view. I mean, great cinematography, the music as ever is really good, and as I said, acting was decent. But aside from that, that's where unfortunately things start to slide for me this week. Because as much as I found myself on a moment-to-moment compelled feeling this week, I also found that I was wishing that things were happening a little bit more and were a damn sight more serious. Now, I don't want to offend anyone here, but there's an awful lot of what I would call maiden aunt humour in this episode, by which I mean the kind of gags and lines that are designed to make, your old Aunt Jessie laugh and cluck in the corner while you're watching it, while everybody else in the room kind of cringes and rolls their eyes. And look, it might work for you. Humour, as they say, is a bit like sex appeal, it's subjective. So if you're hollered and guffawed at this, great, I think that's awesome.
For you.
But myself, I got kind of worried early on, because aside from that weird sort of Ferris Bueller look to camera shot at the very top of the episode, there was this whole moment with the housekeeper lassie telling a captain to put an apron on, and all the stuff with Claire and Lafayette, and that whole protracted scene with the jelly deals. It's not my kind of humour, and I kind of just felt, oh god, why are we doing this? Now, here's the thing. Remember Indiana Jones, the Temple of Doom? There's a bit where they have a meal with the Maharaja guy, and India's deep discussing like British colonialism and kidnapped children with an old British officer and the Prime Minister of Bangkok Palace. Maybe you remember that, maybe not. What you probably remember about the scene is Willie Scott eating bugs and screaming and eyeball soup and monkey brains, because that scene is there to keep the kids who would be bored listening to the plot and politics stuff interesting with something silly and gory. And that's kind of what I felt like watching this, because we've literally got George Washington and Lafayette sat at dinner with Jamie, who is now a general, and they're discussing the upcoming war. And the show is like, nah, don't worry about what they're talking about, which, is important for understanding what Jamie is doing in his plotline. You know what would be really funny? If Claire had to eat something she didn't like and pretend that it's nice. I mean, quite aside from the fact that this is Jamie and Claire living in the 18th century, so they've probably eaten way worse than this when they've been slumming about on their adventures. So I'm not sure why some top-line French jelly deals would be a big deal. I mean, sure, people don't like food, but this really felt less like Claire wouldn't eat this, and more like modern audiences would find this disgusting, so let's have a giggle about it. Most especially American audiences would find this a bit horrible. Also, just on that scene, what was with the dubbing on this line?
General and Mrs. Fraser, for this fine meal.
Now, I haven't mucked about with that. That's exactly how it comes out on the episode, and it just seemed really strange. Bizarre. But this scene also shows that we're back to the problem with Outlander having to make every scene about Claire. If Claire's in it, it must be totally about Claire. And it is. Again, as I said, important scene to do with the plot, the war, what Jamie's up to, and yet everything in this scene is all about Claire. And why is that a problem? The problem is because it's telling us on one hand that we should be invested in the overall plot of what's going on, with Jamie donning the colours and going back to the front line, but the show can't really be bothered because it's not that important, and also because we need to have Claire doing something. Because otherwise, why is she in the plot? Same problem we've had for the last 2 or 3 seasons. And it makes sense to an extent, because we already had a fake out with Jamie's death this half season. So none of us actually thinks he's going to die or get hurt in any way that he can't walk off by next season, which we already know he's in. So the result of that is that I have no idea what's going on with Jamie, with William, with John, or the 2 armies in terms of the military thing. all of which seem to be hanging out a 10-minute walk from John Stolad's house, because the show isn't interested in actually explaining any of this or making it clear, which it has done in previous seasons. I mean, we never had this problem with Culloden and the Scots. It also doesn't help when it comes to the military side of things. Neither one of the two army camps looks much different from each other, and to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just the same set that had been filmed from different angles on different days. And we've also got the messy storytelling and the rushed plots, like the Bree stuff. I mean, come on, this story has been so messy and half-arsed, and the idea that, you know, she's going to come home and there's balaclava men there who Bree shoots at and misses with a shotgun. And I'm guessing she must be missing on purpose, because this is Bree who, you know, is a rapist headshot expert, because we've seen that previously. Also, it must not have been buckshot, because she's literally just firing a shotgun in their general direction. So they would have been burger meat if it was buckshot. But anyway, they leg it and she's like, no cops. Which is kind of loony, because you've not only got witnesses in the form of both kids, but now Ernie and Fiona. And to me, that makes no sense. It's shortcutting that feels really badly written. Now, I can understand Bree would have reasons, because it was a time travel and factors coming into account. Sure, you know, you could be digging a hole, especially because Roger's in the past, so it's not like they can get hold of him, and if he suddenly turns up in old-timey gear with Buck in tow, that would be difficult. But you've got literal masked men at your home, stalking your friends, trying to kidnap you, and you've already spoken to the cops once. It makes zero sense that she wouldn't go back again. So what's she going to do? Zap back to the past with the kids and Roger and live there in fear of the future? I mean, what happens to the house, to their lives? Or Fiona and Ernie, who I wouldn't put it past these guys torturing and murdering them. And while I'm complaining about that, I do not believe for a second that a 20-something-year-old prostitute who has been whoring all of her life does not understand money. If she made out that she was like enumerate or something, sure. But the show's like, no. I know numbers and I know coins, but I only know the value of vagina. I mean, you're telling me nobody in the brothel ever popped out for milk and bread and talked about it, or they never had to go and get a delivery. You're telling me that the wee lassie doesn't have to do that as part of living in the brothel. She isn't like sent out to do stuff, and that Jane didn't have to do that when she was young as well, when she was apparently 10 and working there. Now, she seems to know numbers and cash, so why doesn't her older, smarter, murderous sister know? I call bullshit. And again, maybe all of this is stuff that works fine on the page of the book, where there's paragraphs of inner monologue, extra explanations, but here, it just doesn't work. We're getting it all too thick, too fast, and part of it's definitely down to the show's style and format now, because things have kind of fallen into patterns that I just don't like and find kind of awkward to watch. So where does that leave us now? Well, as I said earlier, this feels like a setup episode, and there are only 2 more episodes left this season. So, in the grand tradition of modern TV, you know, your Game of Thrones, your Squid Games, your whatever, that means that next week, the penultimate episode will be the one with twists, turns, surprises, and cliffhangers, and it either will or won't shut down most of the main plotline, so that either the finale can be a wind down and a gentle lead into Season 8, or that the finale will hold the big final payoff. Now, since we know there's going to be some battle stuff, and we've not really seen any of that yet, I expect it'll all be action stuff in the past, with Ian and John off doing their rescue on William, fighting the Hessians, and that should tie a lot of things nicely up, because, I mean, how can William still be cross with his adopt dad and with his cousin Ian if they've saved his life from the badly wigged Prussians? I also expect Ian's going to have to face his do I murder dilemma that they've been hinting at vaguely all season, because otherwise why include that? And Jamie's going to be fine, but he's probably going to be sad because 1 or 2 of his men is going to die, these random guys that we saw pop up and got named. But I see now why they never made a big deal of him potentially having a showdown opposite William, because that was clearly not on the cards. So why have characters worry about something, even if it's realistic, if the plot is going to circumvent that? And Claire, I mean, this is Claire, she's going to get mucky hands, digging into people's guts and sawing off feet and stuff. And she might be sad about a minor character dying on the table as well, because that usually happens. It's happened a few times on this show. I can't see much else of interest happening there. As to the future plotline, I'm not really sure. I mean, I don't think this show would do an oops and have Roger and Bree miss each other and then spend season 8 trying to get back to each other. That could happen, but I don't think so. Much more likely, the pair will both time travel and will both find themselves back in the main 1780s timeline again, so that everybody's back in the same place for season 8. That would be my guess. Possibly getting followed by the balaclava bad guys in the process, or getting chased to the stones by them, and Bree will have to do a big murder on them all there. I mean, that might tie that up. I feel that's going to get tied up unsatisfactorily anyway. But yeah, this week, despite my many complaints, as I said, it wasn't a terrible episode. It just wasn't anything special. It felt like marking time. Speaking of which, it's the end of the video. And it's also the end of 2024, so yeah, until next time, which will be in 2025, I hope you all have a fantastic Hogmanay, and I hope you've all had a really good year this year. There may be another video sneaking out just before the new year, but we'll see if that happens or not. Watch out for it. And till next time, these have been my grumpy opinions.